Oh, howdy y'all, grab yourselves a beer. It is time for some Path of Exile discussion. Now, this is a bit of an update on my progress in the Legion League and my feelings about it. If you've been following my videos, you'll know that I've not really been that enthusiastic about the league. It took me about a week and a half to reach that conclusion, and as a result, I'm going to be pulling back the amount that I play Path of Exile until the next league comes out. I'll still be putting up the odd timeless video, but I probably won't have much in the way of timely content related to this league in particular. Now, I'm not feeling this league, but I know many people are liking it, and I'll say firstly, good on you. I'm not going to try and rain on your parade, and I'm not going to try to convince you to dislike this league. If you're enjoying this league, fantastic. But I think it's worthwhile having a look at some of the differing opinions that are going around there. There are two really interesting posts on Reddit that were posted, one of them 3 days ago, one of them 4 days ago. And they give completely opposite perspectives on the league, and I think it's worth having a look at both of them. So firstly, there is this post by can't remember GD Pass, who says, "The increased drop rates for everything is making me play way more." And so anyways, a player is saying that last league they couldn't get out of white maps, and this league everything's dropping like crazy and it's inspiring them to log in more. They're finding that they're always being able to find their new maps and that they're enjoying it. Now, that's because they are playing solo self-found, which does have some implications in map sustain. But that said, like during Synthesis League, the way you can always get out of white maps by buying Zana's daily supply, although you can get stuck pretty badly if on the first or second day that you're in maps, Zana spawns on a map that you just can't seem to get to drop for you. But once you're able to do a Zana daily, buying out Zana's supply of maps will fix that problem for you. But in any case, this player either didn't know that or was in that position where they were stranded regularly by Zana, and so they said they got stuck in white maps. They couldn't really push past. And whereas in contrast, they're loving the Legion League because they're getting so many maps that they're not being limited in their Atlas progress by acquisition of maps, and so they're now seeing a whole lot of things, parts of the game that they haven't seen before. The second post was just a headline that got a lot of attention as well. And it's interesting to say that both of these had a lot of discussion. You'll see, thousands of upvotes and hundreds of comments on the increased drop rates are making it better for me post. And then this post, which was just a header, seeing the Headhunter 5-way farm is more disheartening than seeing the most overpowered synthesis crafts, which had 1,000 comments and several hundred upvotes from Sergeant Wobbs. Now, I've hidden a comment. There was nothing wrong with this comment. It's just that the chain was off topic. It wasn't where I wanted to talk about. But this person, moderator, admin, responded with something that's more in lines with what I was wanting to say. The issue is that the people farming 5 ways with Headhunter inflate the cost of the emblems so high that most people trying to do it will likely not even break even on the cost of the emblems. It's up to about 240 chaos for a set of 5 emblems at the time I'm recording this. It's in the 230s. I'd like to do some 5-way fights, but I might as well just delete the currency in my hideout at this point and have the same experience. So, two quite different points of view here, and I wanted to break them down a little bit. I think what we're seeing in the Legion League is the most extreme wealth concentration that I think we've ever seen in Path of Exile, at least in the period since the end of the GCP standard. So people who have played for as long as I have, actually it was slightly before I started playing, the primary trade currency, whereas these days it's Exalted Orbs are the main currency and Chaos Orbs are the secondary one. Back in the early days, Gemcutter's Prisms were the primary currency. They were approximately 10 GCP to 1 Exalt, and approximately 3 Chaos Orbs to 1 GCP. The reason that GCP was so expensive back then, firstly, the Labyrinth didn't exist. When the Labyrinth was added, it added a big source of quality gems, because quality gems are pretty rare outside the Labyrinth. Secondly, the recipe for turning a level 20 gem plus a single GCP into a 20 quality gem It was in the game, but it was not known by very many people at all. Consequentially, these people kept this as a tightly kept secret. 20 quality gems were expensive. You're not just talking one exalt, you were talking, potentially 2 exalts for a 20 quality gem that was popular at all. And although loot filters didn't exist at the time, with the way the economy was set up at the time, say seeing a 15 quality popular gem like faster attacks or blood magic support drop, these were the sorts of things that would have been set up to trigger an exalt tier sound on your loot filter if filters had existed at that point. In any case, the GCP standard collapsed when the 20 quality recipe got known, and then suddenly it became clear that GCP were, there was a lot of artificial price hiking being caused by the fact that so few people knew about this recipe. So demand for GCPs collapsed, and then Exalts and Chaos Orbs took over. Anyway, that's a little bit of history there. Now, what we're seeing in this league, I'm normally a sort of, I can afford Headhunter, but not a mirror player in most leagues. And so, I'll typically accumulate 50 exalts or so. I have the knowledge if I wanted to acquire mirrors, I probably could, but it would require a whole lot of grinding at a pace that I just wouldn't find fun. Now, I had a slow league start this league, which happens. I had a slow league start in Delve as well, and actually in Delve I had a worse league start than I did in Legion. I had a lot of crashes early on, and my initial build was not tanky enough and didn't have enough area coverage. So anyways, I had a slow league start, and then as a result I felt like I was miles behind the top echelon of the economy. Now, I believe in Legion I'm currently further behind the top echelon of farmers than I have been at any point since Harbinger. And in Harbinger League, that was a point at which I was just breaking into endgame. So my first tier 16 map bosses were killed during Harbinger, I believe, maybe during Legacy. Certainly Harbinger was the first time I felt that I had any tier 16 content on farm. Before that, I was a much more casual player. So I now feel I'm miles behind, and if we bring up the cost of unique accessories, you'll see that Headhunter is 120 Exalted Orbs in this league. There's a couple of reasons for that. The first reason is the change in drop rates. I'll leave aside my commentary on that because that does actually impact some of the other things, but I think the problems that I have with this league would still exist if Headhunter had its old drop rates. What's happening is that the amount of loot that is vomited out by the Legion monoliths when you choose your target content to suit the Legion content best. So for instance, if you're on a character that can comfortably farm tier 15 maps but can't handle the Legion monolith in tier 15 maps, you might choose to run tier 8 content instead, because in tier 8 content you can probably just annihilate the whole of the Legion monolith. So if you're running content that is where the Legion monolith is appropriate to your character's power, it will vomit out a lot of loot. What the effect of this has been is the devaluation of most loot in the game. And we'll see that by having a look at, firstly at currency. You see that it's basically, Exalts and Mirrors are holding fairly typical prices. I'm actually surprised that Mirrors aren't more expensive than they normally are. But things like Annulment Orbs, Divine Orbs, Harbinger's Orbs, these are all Ancient Orbs, these are all somewhat oversupplied, and so their value is much lower than it normally would be. The same is true of many of the divination cards, except for the ones related to Headhunter. So you'll see here that things that have previously been very expensive, like Beauty Through Death, this is no longer the sort of drop that makes you a knight. Now it's a sort of drop that you're always happy to see, but it's not something that that gives you a huge boost in your wealth throughout the league. Pride of the First Ones, Immortal Resolve, also all sorts of things that have historically been very expensive divination cards are around half their usual price against the Exalted Orb, and then the Exalted Orb is worth half as much against the Headhunter. So the number of, for instance, Wolven King's Bites that you would need to farm in order to trade for a Headhunter is approximately 3 times what it would have been at this point in the previous league. And that's true for most items. Maps are even further in freefall, and if you think that a lot of my typical play pattern is around farming excess maps to sell to other players, that's just not viable this league. So we've got the natural tier 16s are 15 chaos, and if we just bring up the cost of a headhunter in chaos, 18,000. So you need 12,000 tier 16 maps to make up a headhunter. Yeah, 12,030. So just thinking about the economy of the last league, when I was considering buying a headhunter, which I didn't end up pulling the trigger on, at that point in Synthesis, I believe that it was about 7,000. I believe it would have been about 500. About 500 tier 16 maps rather than 1,230. Sorry, I said 12,030 before. I meant 1,230. So again, it's more than twice as much farming that you need to do in order to acquire the top item in the game. Now that normally, there's always going to be something that's at the top. The thing is that Headhunter is such a broken force multiplier in the current league. What it does is that Headhunter enables you, in all the Legion content, to get more loot from every encounter. And take, for instance, Headhunter in just traditional mapping, without considering the Legion encounters. What it can do is potentially get you down from taking, say, 2 minutes 50 to clear a difficult map to 2 minutes 20. Also makes you a lot safer while you're doing it. Now, you're still getting the same amount of loot per map. You're not getting additional value for each map that you put in, for each scarab that you put into the map device, and so on. You're getting the same amount back, but you're just doing so faster. So just to make clearer numbers, let's imagine that you've got two players. One of them is using Headhunter and is doing 30 maps an hour. The other one is not using Headhunter and is doing 20 maps an hour. The player with Headhunter is acquiring loot 50% faster than the player that doesn't have Headhunter, but they're also spending 50% more resources to do so. Now in the Legion League, the player with Headhunter is going to be clearing the entire monolith every time, whereas the player without Headhunter might only be getting half of it. So this means that the player with Headhunter is getting twice as much of a reward from the monolith encounter, as well as the same 100% of the reward of the rest of the map. Now, I'm just going to call that 150% rewards for the entire map. I'm not sure how accurate that is, but it means that in this world where the player with Headhunter is getting so much more wealth per map, running 30 maps an hour and getting 50% more loot on each of them, you're getting 2.25 times as much loot as the player that doesn't have Headhunter, but you're only spending 50% more than they are on things like scarabs, on maps, and fragments and the like. So this effectively turns Headhunter from a speed multiplier into an actual loot multiplier. It's like putting increased item quantity on the item, which was already broken. Now that's in maps. It's even worse in the domain of timeless conflict, where players with Headhunter and otherwise, you still need a solid character without the Headhunter, but players with it are able to, kill 5 complete rows of monsters. They're able to do so with party bonuses, and just absolutely cause staggering loot explosions at the end. And so, in this sense, I think that players with Headhunter simply get more value from every scarab, every map that they run, and particularly from every one of the fragments that they run, that they consume, so the timeless Marikath emblems and the like that they consume, than players that don't have Headhunter. Now, the way that the economy then reacts to that is that the players that have this powerful loot multiplier end up being in a position to simply pay more for the top consumables. And so things like the timeless Marikath emblems shoot up in price to the point that they're no longer even remotely close to profitable for players that don't have Headhunter to do. So this ends up with a situation where the loot multiplier problems I've talked about a little bit during Betrayal when I was making the case for Divination and Cartographer's Scarabs to be completely removed from the game, and then they ended up being nerfed to the point that they're de facto removed from the game anyway. So I feel that the problem was addressed. That problem ends up coming back, but it's worse than it was in Betrayal. And that's why I feel like I'm so far behind the economic leaders, the people who you are competing with when you're trying to buy the very rarest items in the game. Now, I could just grind and grind and grind and grind, and if I did so, I probably could pick up a Headhunter by the end of the league. But I'd also hate the experience of doing that level of grinding, and so if I'm not going to have fun, I'm just going to sit this one out. What I want to compare Legion to Synthesis in next is the available character high investment upgrades. Now, in the Legion League, there are two. The first one, and the cheaper, is Inspired Learning, the Crimson Jewel, that basically mimics Headhunter but only partially. A very powerful item, and in this league, because it stacks with Headhunter, it's ridiculously expensive. It's a tier 1 rarity unique, there's no divination cards for it, so it's expensive, 23.5 exalts. And, you know, it's the sort of thing that I kind of wish I'd bought early in the league, but then again, we didn't know how the domain of Timeless Conflict was going to work at the point. And basically what's happening here, the reason these are so expensive is the players that have Headhunter and are already efficiently farming without Inspired Learning, they're just encouraged to buy more and more and more Inspired Learnings, fit as many as they possibly can into their build, because it makes Headhunter an even more effective force multiplier for them in the domain of Timeless Conflict, and makes it basically escalates all of the economic issues been talking about already. So this is the first of the high investment upgrades that's relevant. Then there is a second one, and that is here, Headhunter. Below these two, you have things like a 6-link Starforge, or whatever the equivalent is for your build. You know, the powerful unique that is available through normal gameplay, is rare but not staggeringly rare, and that lots of players want. So basically, you have the 14-ish Exalt 6-link Starforge. You have the 23 Exalt Unnatural Instinct. Oh, sorry, not Unnatural Instinct. I always forget the name of this stupid jewel. Inspired Learning. And then you have the massive jump up to Headhunter. What I want to contrast this to is what was available for high investment upgrades in Synthesis. So you had 2 Exalt high investment upgrades there. Things like item level 86 Hubris Circlets that had an implicit plus 30 energy shield. I was producing these a bit during the league, generally selling them for 2.5 to 3 Exalts. They cost less than 2 to produce though. You also had Curse Immunity Shields, which were another good example of something that you could pick up for less than 2 Exalts, that were you know, an extremely powerful upgrade for your character, and something that was like, once you had all the basics, this was the next big upgrade to go for. You then had the 10 Exalt items, things like Onslaught Boots. Now, Onslaught Boots got more expensive towards the end of the league, but they were 10 Exalts for a whole period. You had bows with +1 to socketed gems. You had wands and other caster sticks that had enemies explode for 3 to 5%, depending on whether it's a one-hander or a two-hander of their life as physical damage. These were all 10 Exalt upgrades roughly at the start of the league, and you know, at various points in the league they got more expensive, especially once it was announced they were going Legacy. You then, however, had a whole tier of 50 Exalt upgrades as well. These are things like Headhunter, +2 bows, so bows that had an implicit of, say, +1 to all socketed gems, and an additional +1 that was restricted to support gems. Then you had a series of things that were around the 100 Exalt mark. This would be things like Onslaught Boots that also had 8% movement speed and were Sorcerer Boots. Be an example of something that was a 100 Exalt item throughout that league. Then you had 250 Exalt upgrades that, you know, were far beyond my ability to acquire. Things like Onslaught Sorcerer Boots that had the plus 25% to the effect of Abyssal Sockets in the item. And then you still had your 1000 plus Exalt upgrades like the Ultimate Chase items things like Watcher's Eyes with 3 synergistic mods. So Legion basically has a massive gap between Inspired Learning and Headhunter. There's nothing really aspirational to aspire to in between there. Now, I'm pretty confident that if I was to set myself the goal of going nuts, I could acquire both of those items, but I wouldn't have fun doing so. And I wouldn't feel that there's some huge upgrade that you're making to your character, every now and again that makes you appreciably faster at farming. So for that reason, I feel there's a lot that's missing in my perspective here. The final takeaway that I'd have, though, is that I think that there's really 3 different levels at which people are engaging with the Legion content. The first level, there's the ultra power gamers. These people love this league because they're one of the 2011 ladder characters, at least in softcore trade enabled, that own a Headhunter. They're absolutely crushing it in wealth generation. And these players, who might typically be 1 to 2 Mera per league players, they're probably going to end this one with 7 or 10. These people are benefiting from the wealth concentration that's happening, and they're raking it in. They're acquiring more loot than they've ever had. They're acquiring goals that they've never thought were possible before. A second group of players that I think love the league are more casual players, like much more casual than myself, that love it because items that normally feel really out of reach. And as an example here, I'll use Kaon's Heart. Kaon's Heart's actually dropped a bit in price since I sold divination cards for it recently, but Kaon's Heart can feel completely out of reach to a casual player. This league, yeah, they can definitely get that, and in fact, it's only going to take them, run 30 maps, do the Legion monoliths in them, run sort of 30 low tier maps, we'll say. If they're normally a tier 8 map player, then go and do level tier 2, tier 3 maps. Go do 50 of them, collect all your loot, sell it all, buy a Kaon's Heart, have something over to spare. That item might have felt out of reach in previous leagues, where if it had been the same price, so if it had been 1.7 exalts, they might have needed to keep playing until they had 1 natural exalt drop and 100 chaos orbs in natural drops. At which point, yeah, they'd be able to afford it, but that might take them 200 maps to acquire. So yeah, Legion is definitely offering that type of player a lot more than previous leagues, particularly Synthesis, where the whole crafting mechanics were too complex to follow. But for middle tier endgame players like myself, I think there's basically nothing. You get your 6-link Starforge or whatever your equivalent is. Maybe you're going for a pseudo 7-link Elder weapon, and then maybe you can fit an Inspired Learning in, but then there's no upgrades till Headhunter, and the price of Headhunter is going up faster than you feel you can make progress on it. People running the 5-way Domain of Timeless Conflict generate so much loot that it feels like it's devaluing your drops. So all sorts of things that would normally be the bread and butter of you accumulating wealth over time, with the exception of Exalted Orbs are holding up pretty well. But other than your pure Exalt drops, it feels like you're falling further and further behind all the time. So for that reason, I'm finding that I don't want to play the ultra hardcore style this league. Partly because I enjoyed Synthesis so much that I wanted to not go as hard this league. But I'm not really able to enjoy my typical level of what I'd term middle tier endgame play. So for that reason, I'm going to be taking a bit of a step back. I'm still going to be putting up timeless videos, but more of the stuff I do will be videos, like more of Path of Exile content that I put out will be things that aren't specific to this league. I am still intending to do an introduction to the Delve Mines video. In fact, I did record it at one point, but I made enough mistakes in it that it needs a rerun. So that will come out eventually. But I'm also going to play a few other games and put up some stuff around that. If you're not interested, that's cool. Just pass those videos up if they don't interest you. And I'll probably be, I'll definitely be back with a vengeance for 3.8. One question I've got: how many people are planning on going to ExileCon? I've already got my tickets organised. I'll be there in November. and we'll definitely be organising both a hike and some karaoke over there. So definitely leave a comment below if you're going to ExileCon, or if you're considering it and you haven't made up your mind yet. But anyways, that's all I got for the moment, so just expect there'll be less Path of Exile stuff for the next 8 weeks or so, possibly more from other games, and I will be back.